Hey, Judging Freedom fans, never miss an episode of Judge Napolitano's Judging Freedom. Grab the audio version on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast. Get the audio version of Judging Freedom. Subscribe today.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, October 27th, 2023. It's time for you and me. It's time for Ask the Judge. We keep trying different ways to get the questions up on the screen. So we've looked at some of your questions already, and my producers are going to pop them up on the screen. Chris, I am ready for whatever the first question is. Judge, from Patrick Jean-Claude. Patrick is a regular communicator with the show. Judge, I grew up with survivors of the Holocaust, the Shoah. What happened to never again? Why supporters of terrorists Hamas deserve First Amendment rights in our country? Thank you and Godspeed. So there's two theories of First Amendment rights. One is that they are created by the First Amendment, and the First Amendment was written to protect the freedoms of Americans. The other theory is that our right to think as you wish and say what you think and publish what you say, your right to worship or not to worship, your right to associate or not to associate, your right to tell the government what you think, to shake your fist in the tyrant's face, so to speak. These rights are natural rights that come from our humanity. The First Amendment does not create them. It keeps the government from interfering with them. So, Patrick, even though you apparently find offensive those who want to defend Hamas because of your perception that this has happened in the past and that if Hamas is not crushed, it will happen again, I understand and respect that argument. Your inquiry about whether those who want to defend Hamas in the United States engage in protective speech, the short answer is yes, that is protected speech. In 1969, the Supreme Court reviewed the conviction of a guy named Brandenburg. The case is called Brandenburg versus Ohio, who called for attacks on the Jewish people and on African Americans. He was convicted in an Ohio court. The convictions were upheld through the Ohio Supreme Court. The US Supreme Court vacated the conviction and threw the charges out unanimously and laid down the modern rule of First Amendment jurisprudence, and that is all innocuous speech is absolutely protected, and all speech is innocuous when there is time for more speech to address it. So if somebody were to say, Hamas are freedom fighters, that is protected speech, even though to most of us, Hamas are terrorists, as long as there's time for more speech to contradict or to challenge it. The framers made a value judgment a long time ago. It is better to have protected free speech and all the controversy and all the consternation that comes with it than to have a government decide what speech is protected and what speech is not. Douglas Roderick, Your Honor, in asking this question, to me it is common knowledge or sense. Yet with the environment that we live in, it seems that there is no rule for law. The question is a gag order constitutional? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, Douglas, that depends who you ask. If you ask this judge who never entered a gag order, I tell you it is unconstitutional, because even though the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, today that means no government, federal, state, or local, executive, legislative, or judicial, no government shall make any law abridging the freedom of speech. So to me, All gag orders are unconstitutional because they abridge the freedom of speech. Now, there are two bases for gag orders. One is to protect jurors, and the other is to protect witnesses. So we'll talk about Donald Trump's litigation in New York. There are no jurors in that case for the court to protect. And Donald Trump has never attacked any witnesses. He has attacked court personnel. In my opinion, that is protected speech. If he has reasons to believe that the judge and the judge's law clerk, I don't know where he gets this from, but he doesn't have to say where he gets it from, that the judge and the judge's law clerk are biased against him, or prejudiced against him, I should say, he has the right to say that. Now, not all judges agree with me. In fact, most disagree. And if they think that a litigant in the case, somebody from the government or the defendant in a criminal case, or the plaintiff or the defendant or defendants in a civil case, are impairing the freedom of jurors by threatening them with their words or threatening witnesses with their words, they will clamp down immediately. I believe that the clamping down is unconstitutional, but I'm in the minority. The overwhelming majority of judges believe that they can silence litigants for the sake of protecting the integrity of the process, which means jurors and witnesses. Ready for the next one, Chris? Boy, these names are unbelievable. Jacula Spectacular. Love it. Hi, Judge. Can you please discuss Netanyahu's judicial reforms prior to October 7th? What were your concerns on their impact on democracy and judicial independence? Do you see similarities emerging in the United States? Great question. So prior to October 7th, when the focus of those in government in Israel was on other things, now it's on just this war and the national security of the state and the people in the state. Prime Minister Netanyahu, who himself is a defendant in a criminal case for bribery, and the evidence of his guilt, in my opinion, is overwhelming. He hasn't been convicted yet. He's innocent until proven guilty. There is no jury. There's a panel of 3 judges. That's the Israeli system. Prime Minister Netanyahu proposed legislation that would allow the government, him, to choose judges. In Israel, judges are chosen by sitting judges, an interesting system. So the present Supreme Court, when it's time for somebody to retire, there's 15 members on the Israeli Supreme Court. The remaining 14 would choose a 15th. The purpose of that procedure is to assure judicial independence, so that whoever is running the government cannot stack the court. Our system in America, of course, is different. The president nominates, the Senate confirms. In my case, the governor of Jersey nominated me. The New Jersey State Senate confirmed me. That's the system in about 13 states. In about 37 states in the United States, judges run for office just like they do for other offices. What did Prime Minister Netanyahu want to do? He wanted to deny the right of the judiciary to declare unconstitutional anything that the government did. That, of course, would neuter the judiciary and allow the government to do whatever it wanted, from fighting a war to suppressing rights to crushing civil liberties to exonerating people who are obviously guilty to deciding who was guilty and who was innocent. It would neuter the judiciary and basically make it a rubber stamp of the government. If you ask Prime Minister Netanyahu, he would say, well, the Israeli Constitution, like the British Constitution, is not written down like the American Constitution is. It's a series of traditions called common law, and judges shouldn't be free to reject those traditions. So this is too much power in the hands of the judiciary. That's Prime Minister Netanyahu's view. In my view, the Israeli judiciary is one of the most highly respected in the Western world. It seriously defends civil liberties and the rights of the individual against the encroachment of the state. And what Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to do was tyrannical, and the Israeli public, the majority of them believed it was. This is all on the back burner, of course, until the war is over. I hope I've answered your question. Mr. or Ms., can't tell the gender, spectacular. All right, do we have another one? Vlad, the sanctions impaler. Okay, Judge, you ask each of your guests about the possibility of World War III erupting. Let me ask you the same. What is the possibility? I think you mean probability of World War III. I'm sorry to say, I think the probability of it is high. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for the reasons I just articulated when discussing the judiciary, once the war is over, will soon be out of office. He'll be out of office because his government will be voted out of office because it failed to keep the Israeli people safe, even though Bibi Netanyahu's greatest claim to office is I and I alone will keep you safe. There have been liberal prime ministers of Israel. Ehud Barak, a friend of mine, comes to mind. By the way, I'm also a friend with Prime Minister Netanyahu. You meet all these people when you work full-time at a network, as I did at Fox for 24 years. But Prime Minister Netanyahu will only stay in office for as long as the war is waging. So it's in his interest to keep that war raging, even if it involves other countries. One of the goals of Hamas, as horrific as their invasion was to bring about the worst in Prime Minister Netanyahu's government and to get him to overreact. That will cause the rest of the Arab world to be staunchly in favor of the two-state solution. The Palestinians will have their own government. They won't be subjugated to the Israelis. And the Israelis will resist that. And as other Arab countries get involved in the fight, and as we get involved in the fight, bingo, there's World War III. I'm sorry to say this. I believe it's coming. Unless the United States can get Prime Minister Netanyahu to dial it back, leave office, put in power someone who believes in the traditions of the Israeli judiciary and who will respect the rights of the Palestinian people. I don't think that Vlad, the sanctions impaler, is the Vlad whose picture is there, Vladimir Putin, but a great question nevertheless. Chris, do we have another one, or should I go to the list? Saleh Saeed. Judge, thank you for the great conversations. I have to tell you, Mr. Saeed or Ms. Saeed, these are great conversations, and I thank the people that come on. Colonel McGregor, fabulous. Scott Ritter, courageous and terrific. Professor Sachs, one of the brightest people I know. Professor Mearsheimer, who's coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern today, one of the brightest people I know. Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern, they have been friends of mine and sources of mine when I was on Fox News for years. I highly, highly respect them. I even respect Jack Devine. I know most of you can't stand him, and I disagree with him on just about everything, but I respect him. He gave 40 years to what he believed was the internal security, the external security of the United States of America by spying on foreign governments and passing that information on to his bosses. We may believe that the CIA is out of control, but at the time Jack was there, he believed he was doing the right thing, and he's a friend of mine, and I respect him for it. I respect Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. I respect Matthew Ho. I respect all of our regular contributors. What they say is fascinating. They all come from nearly a lifetime in their particular fields. John Longmire, odds of a peace deal in the Middle East. That will depend upon Prime Minister Netanyahu. If he can be persuaded to engage in diplomacy, which he knows will mean the end of his years as prime minister, there will be a peace deal. If he can't, if he thinks he can take on Hamas, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Turkey, Iran all at once, there will be no peace deal. And I don't know what will be left of Israel. Israel has every right to exist. Prime Minister Netanyahu seems more concerned about his own longevity in office than he does the security of the Israeli people. Judge, thank you for what you do. A quick question. Would a central bank digital currency be unconstitutional? Right now, the money in your pocket is unconstitutional. Why? Because the Constitution does not authorize a private entity to issue money, and the Constitution does not authorize paper money. It authorizes only gold and silver issued by the government. So the Federal Reserve printing cash, the existence of the Federal Reserve is all unconstitutional. Has any of this ever been ruled on by the Supreme Court? Well, right after the Civil War, which was the first time that paper money was issued by the federal government. At this point, Lincoln was dead. The government was bankrupt. People had paper money. They didn't know what it was worth. It was no longer backed by gold. There was a challenge as to whether the legal tender laws, that's the name of the statutes that make paper money lawful currency, was constitutional. The Supreme Court said it was not. Oh, this was way too much for those who ran the government. So they added 2 justices to the Supreme Court. They brought the case back, and this time the new Supreme Court with the additional 2 justices said, oh, paper money is legal, and off to the races. And 20 years later, 30 years later, we had the Federal Reserve centrally planning and regulating everything that the banks do. To your question, would digital currency be constitutional? Digital currency, well, anything that you want to give me in return for my services, from a piece of gold to a banana peel, anything that we agree is of value between us is constitutional. I think what you mean by this question is it constitutional for the government to issue it or the government to require it? And the answer is no, it is not, because that power was never given to the government in the Constitution. Now, don't go out there and use banana peels as currency, but whatever a willing buyer and a willing seller will accept is valid and lawful currency. Alexander L.F. Judge, are the US EU Trustworthy Partners considering the track record? UN Resolution 242, NATO non-expansion, Minsk Accords, never seriously considered to be respected. How does one deal with such partners? The mentality of the people that run the EU, the mentality of the folks that run NATO, is the same mentality of the deep state in the United States that runs the State Department and runs the Department of Defense. None of them, including our own people, are trustworthy. They're all in favor of bigger government. They hate Russia. They hate China. They want to start wars. They make promises, and their promises are not believable because they don't follow through on them. So, yes, the EU and yes, NATO are unworthy partners, and they are unworthy of belief. But so is the United States. I think we probably have time for one more. Judge, and from Marco Urizar, Judge, in your view, what are the chances of a new speaker to stop or control funding for forever wars? Great question. Regrettably, the new speaker is in favor of the forever wars, as are about 90% of the members of the House, as are about 80% of the members of the Senate. You've probably heard me say this before. There are progressives on the left, AOC, Bernie Sanders. They're not in favor of forever wars. There are libertarians on the right, Congressman Thomas Massey, Senator Rand Paul. They're not in favor of forever wars. But because of the way the military-industrial complex has insinuated itself into our society, stated differently, because they build jet fighters and ammunition and artillery equipment in congressional districts all over the country, and because senators and members of Congress are terrified of losing their jobs, which they fear they will do if they vote against the forever wars and the defense budget shrinks and some of these people are put out of work, the forever wars will continue. I don't know Mike Johnson. I've never met him. but looking at his voting record, he is a big government, pro-war, pro-deficit spending, pro-deep state Republican. Here's a good test. Section 702 of the FISA Act expires at Christmas time. What's that? That's the law that allows American spies to spy without search warrants on foreign persons communicating from outside the U.S. into the U.S. and foreign persons here, even when they communicate with Americans. So does the Fourth Amendment only protect Americans, or does it protect persons? Read it. It protects all persons, whether they're from India or Israel or Pakistan or Iran or China or Russia. They're in the U.S., they're communicating with the U.S., their right to privacy is protected, and that right to privacy can only be invaded by a search warrant. So, Speaker Johnson, what will you do? Will you even allow the reaffirmation of Section 702 to come to a vote? If you do, you have fallen prey to the big government that terrifies the rest of the House of Representatives. I hope I'm wrong. Prediction, he'll allow it to come to a vote because he's a creature of big government. I've enjoyed this. I hope the rest of you have. I got to save my voice for a few minutes because in 8 minutes, one of my favorite guests, big brain time. I'm talking about the great guests earlier. I think I forgot Alistair Crook, one of the smartest people I know. Coming up, one of the smartest people I know at 4 o'clock Eastern, Professor John Mearsheimer. Are the Israelis interested in diplomacy? Do they realize they might be dooming themselves? Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.